people just want to feel connected, or they want to feel acknowledged in some form, and the largest way to empower someone is to see something of their life and to pull it forward.
How's it going?
It's going great, man. How are you, man?
I'm not too bad. Congratulations on the record. It's really beautiful.
Thank you so much, man.
Last time I was talking to you, you were in here to talk about the last record.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember at the end of the conversation, you said something like, yeah, that's done. That record's done. And I want to show everybody something different.
Yeah.
When it comes to my actual debut record.
Yes.
So I was excited to see when the record came out.
Yeah.
What was on your mind when you were writing this record?
It's actually haunting to hear you say that, because that was like a steady pillar in my thinking around the following record. The themes of grief are so redundant, not only in the recording of my first record, but in my life in general, in every conversation, every text message, every meeting, every gathering. Every large gathering I knew was a gathering for loss and not much for celebration. So hearing you recall what my intentions were, yeah, it wins me, and it reminds me of this thing in Islam that is mentioned, that you plan and God plans, and God is the best of planners. And the themes are all the same. I returned to loss again. I returned to grievance again, because I just can't control the course of calamity in my life, So it was just so difficult to look above it, or to try to even look below it, and I wanted to.
Yeah. That was very clear to me, right? Last time you were here, you were like...
It was incredibly clear.
Yeah, that was it. The record about grief and the record about death is done.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't actually say this whole record's about that, but like the record about grief and the record is done. And now you said, like, just wait till you see what I do next. But what you're saying you're haunted by is that it was inevitable in some ways too.
I guess I was a fool to think that I was going to dictate the direction of the next record. My life dictates the direction of the next record. I remember I was talking to a label executive who wanted to sign Dunya, and he told me, "Do you think the ache is gonna remain?" And I actually started laughing, because I said, "Yeah, well, if the ache remains in my life, then surely it'll exist on the record, because that is what my responsibility is as an artist. It's to record a moment in time, and if the moment in time is ache, then that's what's going to be crystallized. And if it's a different thing, then it will be." So I think when my brother passed, when he was killed, it was impossible for me to look outside of that and explore a different thing, because I'd be doing a disservice to the year and to the memory. And so the record was rearranged after his passing, because I had to be true to what these years were, because I'm capturing a feeling that I can recount later. I'm capturing the feeling in case someone attempts to recount it for me. And sometimes we end up conflating someone else's account of a memory with our own. And I think people overestimate their ability to remember their pain. And people overestimate their ability to remember the joy that they feel as well. And it's just so important to write it all down.
I mean, that's why they call it a record.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Tell me about the trip you went on when you started writing this record. You went to Egypt and to Sudan, and then that sort of what I read there. You said something like that trip was a microcosm of what I wanted to explore.
I have like little allegiance to nation, state, and even my own relatives, only because of the conditions that I grew up in. You grow up. I was born and raised in Toronto, and I remember actively trying to assimilate into whatever cultural norm existed. And then I would go back home and I would attempt to do the same thing. And you only have that fuel for so long before kind of you develop this kind of apathy, or you really just, you're fatigued and you give up on trying to assimilate, and you kind of become a mountain on your own, and you identify other people that exist in that way as well. And that becomes your community. But being alone with other people is not much of a community, you know? You still feel untethered in some way. So I think when I was back home, when I went to Sudan, even when I went to Egypt, I was writing this music and I didn't have a grip on the Arabic language in the way that I wanted to have it. And I didn't have a grip on the culture or on the music. And I felt so distant. And even then I thought that maybe I'd feel closer to myself if I was there, but I couldn't feel further, I think, you know, not at that period anyway.
You went there to try, did you go there to write?
I went there to write, but I also went there to try to recover a thing that I thought I lost of like myself, of being a Nubian person, being a person of the Nile, being just thinking of how I'm always constructing a bridge to try to speak to my parents.
Yeah.
And I wanted to go to the place where all of what they are and all of what they know was established, you know, and I thought that it would help me connect with them in maybe in a more effective way. But in going there, I realized that it was much more impossible. It was a much more impossible task than I thought it would be. You know, even I'd go to the Cairo Jazz Bar and I'd listen to musicians that were so singular and so free in their expression. I would try to have conversations with them afterwards, and there were so many barriers in just my speech and trying to get them all the way to Sakata, where I was like recording the music, and it just it was much more glamorous in my mind, you know. And you remember people have lives like, you know, the most celebrated guitar player in Cairo is working a 9 to 5.
Yeah.
You know, the most celebrated guitar player in Toronto has a 4-year contract with Fender, probably. You know?
Yeah.
You know, so it's just like
yeah.
I forget the way that kind of, you know, capitalism is not intersected with music in that part of the world, and that was also a thing that I had to try navigating, you know, and I had to be sensitive to that as well because I had a limited time when I was there. But it was strange. It was like I went there to write music, and in turn I just went to learn. In turn, I was just learning so much about myself, and so many of my friends came with me. A lot of musicians came with me, and they looked to me to be the thread that connects it all.
The guide.
But I wasn't much of a guide. I was more like them than they even realized, you know? And sometimes someone would speak really quickly and they would look to me to translate. And this is kind of like a more practical thing. And I'd be like, oh no, like, I mean, he spoke too quickly and I'm not even able to, I couldn't even grasp what he was saying. There's so many idioms and I'm trying to like hold on to these two worlds, you know? And I think that's why it was much of a microcosm, because people from my hood were there, people from the music world that I entered and found community in were there, and then it was the land itself and my own family, and I realized that I didn't really have a strong hold on any of it.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. So do the songs then become about the tension in between?
Absolutely.
If you're not feeling firmly rooted, one can get lost in the idea that they're not firmly rooted in other places.
Absolutely.
In either place.
Yeah.
But often great art or great songwriting comes out of the acknowledgement of that tension.
Absolutely.
So the writing began about that tension in some ways.
Yeah. It's like, it's almost as if you're at the doorway of understanding, and you're also, you know, almost at the doorway of dishonesty as well. You know, it's just like there is, you know, you want to be loved, you know, and you want to be seen, you want to be held. Everyone does, you know. And I think acknowledging that is as important as going through any of those doors. So it's like, I think a lot of the record was acknowledging how invisible I felt in all these spaces. You know, so much of the record was about how small I felt, and I think, when we acknowledge just how quickly we and what the extents we're willing to go to see ourselves, it's like it's unprecedented.
What was the first song you wrote over there?
Beauty End was the first record I wrote. I wrote that probably the second day that I was in Egypt.
What inspired it?
What inspired Beauty End is what I walked through when I was in Regent Park, and then going all the way there and seeing how the emptiness, it was so empty that the emptiness turned supple in some way. And it was a similar kind of emptiness that I remembered when I was in Regent Park, that in the night when I would walk on the road, or, amidst the demolition, I could see so far, yet not so, yet not anything at all, and it was odd. It was almost like, the sky feels so close to the earth because the ground is so empty, and they almost feel like, mirrors of each other, just in different colors. And I think when I was in Egypt, it felt the same way. Like, it felt like, the sky and the sand were so close to each other, and it just produced a similar kind of feeling. And so I went on to write the lyrics, like, and those nights I was trying to just escape myself, and asking too many questions about humanity and about myself and about who's not ruined by beauty, you know what I mean? And so much of the beauty that I know, so much of the beauty that I've held, and so much of the beauty that I've recognized is a beauty that I've only recognized after the death of a thing, So I think being in Egypt, all that emptiness, I could only acknowledge the beauty of it after everyone was gone, after things have been flatlined, after my people were driven out of that sand and into different corners of Sudan and on the outskirts of Aswan. And a similar thing happened in Regent Park, where only after those buildings came down and I was left with the debris and I was left with the brick and the cranes, I was able to remember the thing that had such an infinite grace, and I never seen it in all of its grace and all of its beauty when it was all happening, and I think it was just, and that's why I think the song came,
It is interesting to me that you wrote so much of this record outside of Toronto.
Yeah.
Having left Toronto, was that important to you?
Yeah. It's just so hard for me to write in Toronto, it's hard for me. I love the city, I love this country, and I think that's where much of my resentment comes anyway. It's because of how much I want to be in it.
Yeah.
And how much I want to be connected to it. I love to walk. I can't walk in Toronto, not because I'm famous and people are going to chase me down. And people always confuse my not wanting to walk with some sort of delusion.
Yeah, some sort of paparazzi thing.
Some sort of delusion of visibility. And it's not that at all. Like, I have no concern with that. I'm not a pop star. It's just that I'm not safe in this city, And I think saying it in such a naked way, it even makes me uncomfortable, because it's taboo. It's taboo amongst my dogs and amongst the people in the hood to even, question our own safety, because so much of our life was about protecting ourselves and relying on each other to be safe. Every friend that I lost thought that they were protected, and they had to believe that of themselves, because, absorbing or acknowledging or internalizing the fact that you're not safe and that you're in a state of emergency, it's exhausting. And it's exhausting to carry that with you. There's already so much that we have to carry, and, to have to add that on when you're going to get pizza or when you're going to visit a friend, it's not ideal, and it's not sustainable.
It's not tenable, no.
No, it's not. And I think for myself, maybe I have the privilege now to acknowledge how little I thought of my safety or of my comfort when I was in Toronto, it's that's come from the fact that I'm no longer here, you know, and yeah, unfortunately, I want to be in the city. It's like the death of someone where like you resent them and you grieve them because there's a love that you have for them that you cannot give to them, and that is my relationship with the city. It's like I have such a great heart and feeling for it, but it's always made narrow when I'm in this city because there is no place that I could put it where it's not compromised. And yeah, it's just like there are people in the city that don't want to see me live. And I have to remember that and I have to reckon with that. And every now and again I get messages about that, and I understand because I'm from a community that's deeply complicated, and there are thousands of people in my community, but because I wear it, and I have to wear it because I don't have anything else to wear because it's all that I've known. Because I wear it, people believe that I'm also wearing any kind of pain that they could have caused to another community and vice versa. And if I was still in the arms of Regent Park and in the arms of Toronto, then maybe some of the violence that has affected my life and has affected my days, it wouldn't be a thing that I'd be able to part from, you know, and I'd be carrying the same kind of rage that some of my boys and boys from other communities carry. I think I'm growing more and more and more empathy for boys from all of these communities, and it's not to say that I don't feel my own personal resentment, anger. Yeah, it's like I don't want forgiveness. I don't want forgiveness to be a stipulation for Black excellence.
I don't want forgiveness to be a stipulation for Black excellence.
Yeah.
In order to be great, I don't want to have to forgive, have to.
Yeah, and I think that it's like
lower myself and forgive.
Yeah. Where I'm like, and listen, I believe forgiveness is the highest thing, even in my faith, even in Islam. It's like there is nothing like forgiveness. It is a universe on its own, and there is no beauty like it. But it feels so often that I see individuals celebrated for their ability to forgive, but I want to be celebrated for my ability to hold on. And because it feels that if I forgive the individuals that have caused me such deep and unrelenting harm, then I'm absolving them, the systems, and all other parts accountability. I don't want to absolve anyone of accountability, And when I think about the dead, when I think about my brother passing and his body being left on the concrete from 12 p.m. to 10 p.m. and I think about the way that the policing system and the healthcare system dealt with us as we tried to grieve him, but also deal with the logistics of his death. I have to remember that sometimes it's not for me to forgive. I'm not the one who passed. I'm not the one who was murdered. It's like, how can I forgive a murderer on behalf of my brother, on behalf of my friends? It feels as though I'm taking the place of someone that's no longer here, I think forgiveness is important because it's lodged into our bodies. It's a thing that we carry, and I think these trauma points, we never know what they can become. But forgiveness is like a really peculiar thing, and I swing back and forth with it like a rope over a lake. I don't know what it is, and it becomes a new thing every day,
Why did you write Leaving Toronto in Toronto? Like, if the rest of the record is, can we play Leaving Toronto? Gabby, do you have that? It's 00918.
I'm leaving Toronto. There's nothing left to give me. I held it all. Oh, there's nowhere I can go. drove 5 hours to cry in Montreal. This time I learned to be alone.
What goes through your mind listening to that?
I had a really hard time writing a song about the city, and I just don't, I need to be able to see the pain in its fullness. I have to, that vantage point is critical. And when I was writing the other songs, it was almost as if I was looking through a looking glass, at the entire city, at the memory and at the skyline, and I could look at it closely and intimately, but then I could also look at it, from like a bird's eye view in some way.
You were in hindsight. You were looking at it from outside. You were looking at it from what some would call like an edict perspective. Like you were able to look at the entire.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Edict perspective is it, and it's like, in that perspective was critical. When I'm in the city, it's like I'm in, not only just like, I'm not talking about like physically, but like I'm in the pain of something that I cannot see, like whenever my friends like are feeling something and they immediately write about it, I realize that's a power I don't have. It needs to be in hindsight for me. And so with leaving Toronto, I just wanted to try my hand at a song about the city, in the city. Like I wanted to see what it would produce, writing a song here. And I just sat with it. I sat with the feeling, and I waited for it to come forward. I think, genius is spoken about as a thing that arrives to you once or twice. I mean, at a point in time, it was spoken about as an arrival, and if you're lucky, it came once in your life. If you're lucky, it came twice. And I think I feel similarly about being able to see your pain in its fullness. And I think sometimes, if you're lucky, you're able to follow esoteric instructions and engage in a ritual that allows for the pain to leave your body just for a moment so that you could see it in its fullness, almost like a body on its own. And it's almost like I sat with the pain until it materialized, in front of me.
How did it materialize in front of you?
I think it materialized in memory, and it materialized in just kind of like a tapestry of longing.
Like came over you.
Yeah, where it's just like where I was almost able to see exactly what I longed for, because again, it's like I'm constantly interrogating any feeling coming forward, especially when it's about the city, because I struggle to have to surrender to how much I want the city and how much I want to also leave it. And I think all of my longing, materialized right in front of me. I was able to see it. I was able to see it almost like on a canvas, and so the song came quite quickly when that happened. But it took a while for me to begin writing. I think so much of it festers and it takes its time. It takes its time through me, and then it comes out quite quickly. Yeah.
I want to ask about that process just a little bit later. I'm going to make a note for myself to remember that because I have a question about that when it relates to the other songs. But I want to go back to what you were talking about at the beginning. You were talking about your folks. You were talking about you had gone to Egypt and Sudan, and you were saying I was trying to find a bridge. I was trying to find a bridge to my family. I was trying to find a bridge to who I was raised being told that I was versus who I was in my own city, and sort of investigating the tension in that.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite moments is one of my favorite songs on the record is "I'll Go Anywhere." My understanding is the melody in "I'll Go Anywhere" is based on a melody you heard growing up. Is that right?
Yeah.
What song was it you heard growing up?
Well, the thing is like my mother used to sing mantras while she was washing dishes, and some of them just stayed with me. There was kind of a current beneath me when I used to step out into the world, and
you'd hear them with you.
You'd hear them, and it's like I think there is no power like the power of something existing beneath you that used to be intrinsic to your comfort when you were a child. So like for my mother and for my father, both of them, like they've never told me they loved me before, and I'm not saying that as a single statement. It's connected to something that I think is even more beautiful than their confessions of love. It's that they spoke to God on my behalf, and that was the highest form of love for them.
Yeah.
So a lot of times I kind of existed in the plane between the prayer that they were sending into the sky. And so much of my life I sat down on prayer mats and watched my mother and father go back and forth with different prayers linked to their DNA that they felt were worthy of sending to God about me. And it's almost like watching the world with someone you love as opposed to looking at them and telling them that you love them. It's like, it's this Rumi poem that I really love where he says, the love I've not known is not of two people staring at each other, but of two people staring in the same direction. And in some way, through the years of my mother and father praying for me and looking up to God for me, I followed suit. And after some years, I found that I was also looking to God with them, And so I would look to them and they would look to God. And eventually I realized that it wasn't about them at all. And it was about all of us looking together to the sky and all of us finding something different when we looked up.
I want to acknowledge that the mantras you may have been singing might have been, something very personal, maybe not something you want to reveal. Can you just talk to me a little bit about taking that fragment of a melody or exactly how you took that and put it into the song? Do you remember?
Well, it's so funny. On my first record, I sampled a lot of Sudani songs on burial and war. And these are songs that women and children used to sing when the men would come from war and when they would go out to war as well. And I thought, well, this is like, a perfect sonic arrangement for the thing that I am exploring, which is a new war and boys going out into new war and mothers praying that they return from that war alive. And when it came to I'll Go Anywhere, I was trying to focus on just like the tenderness that existed in the lives of so many Sudani women. And my mother would keep singing and she would sing and sing. And eventually I heard her sing a note and I knew that I wanted to sing the line, I'll go anywhere to bring me closer to you. And so when I heard her sing this melody line, I grabbed onto the melody line and I focused on it. And I focused on it and it stayed with me. And sometimes I hold a melody or I hold a chord or I hold a word and I don't write it down. Because it's my belief that if I remember it, that it's supposed to stay.
Yeah.
So by the time I was in Egypt and I was working on this song, I remembered what my mother sung to me in that kitchen. And I was like, well, it could be nothing else. Because if it followed me all the way here, across the water, in this little studio in front of this little pyramid, then surely it's supposed to be shared with the world.
I find it interesting that so much of this record, when I was listening to it, was about, I think Iman struck me like this, but it's about the deepening relationship with God that you've been having over, I think, the past few years, maybe.
Yeah.
How do I say this, Mustafa? I hope you take this in the spirit that I mean it.
Go crazy.
After experiencing things that would turn people away.
Yes. I mean, absolutely.
I can't mean, how many people do I know who have suffered tragedies?
Yeah. No, thank you
people
for
have
asking.
been,
Yeah,
and have said, I can't possibly believe in anything that would,
Yeah, I'm really glad you said this. Well, faith fluctuates, and it's a thing that is acknowledged in Islam. That you're always having to revive your spirit as a believer because it's being tried and it's being tested. Sometimes there's an active fire beneath you. And it's only then that you understand your distance from God or your closeness to God. In Islam, the people that are tested the most are the prophets. You're tested on your grade of faith. And the stronger your faith is, the larger the tests are. And the weaker your faith is, then the smaller the tests become. And sometimes I don't think that even, it doesn't really take the form of violence, but maybe just the hold that it's having on your actual heart, just so you're not driven away from the faith entirely. But I did question God, and I questioned the kind of suffering that I was experiencing, especially in relation to murder. I just wanted to lose someone differently. I know all too well what happens when a body is washed or when a case is opened like a casket and closed like one. When an investigator is attached to a family and, you get the bureaucratic shrug in relation to a universe that you lost. And, you retrieve the clothes of the person that you loved years after they passed because an investigation was underway. But the investigation never resulted in an arrest. But still you're facing the ramifications of an investigation that doesn't result in any solace or any retribution or any understanding. Most of my friends, I'd say if I lost like 20 friends, right? That's probably ballpark. It's much more than that, but I'm saying 20 people that impacted me, that were like in my life. It's including my brother. The two murders that resulted in convictions were for two boys that were murdered in neighborhoods where wealthy people were made vulnerable. And that is not a coincidence. No one who was murdered in Regent Park, including my brother, none of those investigations and none of those cases, I think, were taken with such, kind of severe focus and attention in the way that those deaths were, Person that I known 40, Allah yarhamul, I remember frequenting his home when I was really, really young, and he passed in the Eaton Center. That resulted in a conviction. Well, because of the collateral. And again, the collateral were folks that weren't from the inner city. And the inner city is just not granted the same right or care as people from other communities. That is just the reality. And I try not to kind of exaggerate my experience, only because it's already so, it's already so large in its form.
Yeah.
And I try to think about things technically. I really do, you know.
Yeah.
But when I realized that, it was actually quite harrowing, There's just not much I can do to understand it. And so all I have left is my faith.
Yeah.
The only rope that I have is my faith, The only rope that I have is my faith in God, and in turn, that is my faith in the people around me. I am holding on to the rope, irregardless of how many fires are starting. When I hear things in the faith that, this world was made a prison for the believer and a heaven for the disbeliever, that gives me hope, you know. It gives me hope that it doesn't end here. I do feel deeply disconnected from a lot of the joys and a lot of the successes that my peers are striving for. And that, for me, is a great power. I've never reached a stage and felt satisfied on that stage. Uh, I and that, to me, there is a great comfort because because I'm not drunk on any of those. I'm not drunk on any of those successes. You know, it's like I've reached some of them. There's so many things that I wanted to do, and in reaching them, I felt nothing.
Yeah.
But I really did. Like, I really felt nothing. And if anything, I felt the opposite. You know what I mean? It was just like, you know, you set an intention or you set a goal for yourself, and then once you reach that goal, it's like then you begin to feel all that you escaped in the pursuit of that goal. That so many of the goals that I've set for myself are goals I've set so that I don't have to look back, you know? I had to say that I'm striving for this so I don't have to look back at like a dead body here or a person doing life in prison there or, you know, just, you know, a light that was lost in my father's face over there. It's like if I focus on the goal, then maybe like even subconsciously I've tricked myself into believing that all those things will be corrected
Yeah.
by the time I reach it.
Yeah.
But now I know, and I know too well, that that is just not a reality. And so much of the beauty that I'm going to feel is after I pass. And so when I think about passing, I think the only thing that I could do is surrender myself to my faith, because everything about my faith is about the actual life beginning when you pass, you know, and it's the only way that I can understand the deaths that have happened in my life, because it doesn't make sense that I've lost friends who are 15 and 17 and 18, and each year I grow, I look back and I think, I knew nothing then.
Yeah. Babies.
Babies.
Yeah.
Children.
Yeah.
While Canadian news outlets were describing these boys as young men.
Yeah. Babies.
And I internalized that. And in my mind, they felt like young men to me as well. You know, and it was wild that like even my own understanding of their youth and of their innocence, you know, that infantilization, you know, it's to think that that was obstructed by media outlets and by journalists when I was young, because I wanted to know what was being said about the people that I lost. And now when I think back, I'm able to see it in its truth, and outside of the language that plagued some of those memories, I'm able to see them and say, oh, you guys are children. You guys died as children. And how could I think, of course, this survival's remorse that I feel, that I am the one that's supposed to carry their voices forward. You know, artists have this obnoxious narcissism where they think that they are speaking for the dead and for the living, and that they were chosen to do so.
And that was very much put on you, man.
For sure. And
Yeah.
and in so many ways, like, I don't think that that is true. You know, I think that, you know, at best, you know, I mean, we're kind of glorified journalists, but, you know, I don't think that everybody's life needs to be accounted for by an artist or by a journalist. I don't think that that remembrance is, I don't think that that remembrance is intrinsic to how our lives flourish, you know? I don't think that if someone is forgotten by individuals in this world, it means that they no longer exist. I think that anything that they did on this earth, it is, and the good that they did is remembered by entities that are far more important than the faulty memory of people. And I think so many times, like, people imagine a disappearance when people no longer remember them. And I think it's such a small way of thinking, You know, there are so many entities outside of us that remember us. There is a God, and there are angels, and there is a universe, and there are trees, and there are things that are breathing around us that I think have like a much more important function than a lot of people living. And so I think that so much of my life was about feeling paranoia around people being forgotten. And so many of my friends felt that way as well. So we would put people on t-shirts, you know what I mean, and we would put people in our bios on Instagram, and you know, we would do everything in our power to make sure that they are not forgotten. And I think you do that so much, and you expend so much energy trying to remember someone that you forget to grieve them.
Yeah.
And you forget to remember them.
Yeah.
You know, in trying to make sure that they are remembered, you actually forget to remember them altogether.
Yeah, you become like a totem of them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, like, the remembrance is not the memory.
Yeah.
You know, I think those two things are different.
So what keeps you? I mean, this is a good way to close things off. Like, so then what keeps you writing songs now? Like, you were telling me you're still writing songs. Like, if you've had this sort of break, if you've had this sort of like realization about the role of an artist and what you do and what you don't want to do, what keeps you writing songs now?
I think beauty now is important. You know, I think attaching beauty to everything that we know, or things that were not made beautiful for us, that is an important thing. And it's our responsibility. You know, in Islam, when you recite the Quran, you're supposed to beautify your voice when you're reciting it. And, you know, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ says those who do not beautify their voice when they're reciting the Quran are not among us. And it feels so harsh, but it makes so much sense to me that we have access to all this beauty, and we have access to all this truth. And sometimes the truth is a knife. Sometimes the truth is a boulder. Sometimes the truth is, you know, a nuclear weapon. And who are we to just, you know, give the truth out without trying to dress it in a beauty? And there's so much cloth, and there's so many garments, and there's so many ways to do it. And when I think about music, I think that music is a closet and a home full of beauty that you could attach to literally anything. And it's kind of a set of wings that you can give to anything, to any person, to any experience, to any city, to any community. Sometimes I think back to things that I wrote about corners of my neighborhood that I don't ever even want to walk on. But when I think about the writing of that song, it's almost like I'm manipulating myself into believing that it is an intersection worth sleeping in. It's an intersection worth spending the rest of my days in. You know, some people call that delusion, and some people will even call that, I mean, again, like manipulation, but I call that mercy.
Yeah, I hear it on SNL on the record.
Yeah, it's mercy. It's mercy. We have to give each other mercy. And I think that, you know, reality is insignificant to mercy sometimes. You know, because I think so many of us are living in an idea as well. Like we operate now so much in thought spaces, you know, where we're interacting with people's ideas of themselves and never who they actually are. And so if we're operating in these thought spaces, why not alter the thought so that someone can absorb it in a way that won't harm them, you know? Why can't we kind of alter the thought so it doesn't have thorns, you know? I know that the people, even in my life, or even people that hate me, they're also desperate to be held as well. And I would even argue that a lot of the people that are at war in the inner cities, they even feel held by the war. You know, they feel held by somebody wanting them and wanting them dead and wanting them to no longer be here. Even that feels like a kind of care that is missing from their lives. I know that because I've seen it in my boys, that they feel so untethered and they feel so isolated from the world around them that when somebody even just wants them dead, I don't even think that they hear the dead. They just hear that somebody wants them, and they're able to engage in a life. And everyone wants to engage in a life, in some semblance of a life. And even I did when I was younger. Even I did. I wanted like I wanted to freeze the blood. I wanted a glorious life, a glorious ending, some sort of truth. I wanted to stand on something or with someone or for something, and whatever that is, whatever the empire was, I was willing to be a part of it. And so when I think about the people that I lost, they had such large dreams, and I think they became delirious about their dreaming, and so quickly those dreams become nightmares. So quickly those dreams become their end. But I really think that if the right person held their hand, and if the right person wanted them for something else, then they could have been anything, and they could have been anybody. And so I can't think to myself that I am here and they are not, because I was better equipped. I wasn't better equipped. I was just walked by a different person to a different room. Rooms like this.
But what I'm struck by is the idea that tenderness, the idea that beauty is a choice. And in a society where we're often told to look away from it, that we're supposed to look at the cold, hard truth of life, and that's what life is supposed to be, that choosing beauty itself can be a radical act.
Yeah.
I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah. No, I really do. I see it everywhere, man. Like, I see it in everyone and everything. I was actually wearing a hat and I took it off.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Yeah, because it's like, it's a Second Amendment hat.
Oh, yeah.
And it says like guns, money, freedom. You keep the change.
Mm-hmm.
And I got it in Montana, and me and Daniel were on a road trip writing songs. And I got it because I was like, I have to go to America, and I just want them to feel that I'm aligned, because I'm like a young black Muslim going into the country. So maybe if they see me wearing this hat, they'll feel that I see them. And and I was like, yeah, I do believe in the Second Amendment to some degree. Like,
sure.
I do believe in guns, money, and freedom, just maybe for a different community that they believe.
Yeah.
And and sometimes when I'm looking at them, looking at me, and looking at my hat, it makes me laugh, because again, people just want to feel connected, or they want to feel acknowledged in some form, and the largest way to empower someone is to see something of their life and to pull it forward, and I think that's what it is. I think that's why I think I've remained connected to a lot of my friends, and I've disconnected from a lot of my friends as well, only because when my brother passed, anyone that was connected to him, including the community, I didn't want to have to relive his passing. And sometimes you lose people because they're attached to a memory that you don't want to relive. And so they become the collateral to my grieving, and they can be frustrated because, of course, they've stayed in my life when they've lost their people. And just being able to understand that everyone has their own particular DNA when it comes to grief as well, and everyone is drawn to a different kind of beauty when somebody passes, and it's been a really, really impossible thing. And I realized that impossibility is probably the word I use a lot, because again, like, maybe the loss feels impossible. And even when you spoke about faith and just kind of maintaining my faith,
Feels impossible. Yeah.
it does feel impossible. And I think that that's why I'm able to do it all together, just because you kind of have nothing else, and all that I'm vying for and all of my investment is to a life that is not here, you know what I mean, but it's kind of beyond that threshold, because then that's where the reuniting happens. Like, there's a classroom of children that I need to speak to when I'm no longer here, and I plan on speaking to them. And there's also like a living room filled with family members that I also have to speak to. And so every single time I write a song, I'm thinking about the beauty that I need as fuel to carry me through this life here. And that's really what it is. Sometimes I write a song and my will to live goes from 70% to 63%. And it's like, and that's an important thing, you know what I mean? And I think that music is able to do that. And it's literally just carrying me forward from one joy to the next, and trying to discount everything happening between those two joys, you know?
It's so beautifully said, and such a beautiful record. And thanks for coming in, man.
Thanks for having me, bro. I appreciate it.